All right, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the first screencast on Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is going to consider different types of price controls. All right. So previously, we've talked about how equilibrium in our supply and demand model is determined by the forces of supply and demand themselves. And a shortage means there's excess demand for whatever the good is that we're modeling in our supply and demand diagram. And this will happen at prices that are below the equilibrium. So remember, we have our price and quantity, and we have the demand curve, and we have the supply curve. And so this is our equilibrium price, P star, and our equilibrium quantity, Q star. All right. But if for some reason the equilibrium price is below the market price, you will have a quantity supplied that does not equal the quantity demanded, and that is our shortage. The quantity demanded will be up here, the quantity supplied down here, and that's where you get a shortage. The same thing happens on the other side. So here is our equilibrium price and quantity, supply, demand. This would be P star and Q star. Quantity supplied equals quantity demanded, but if the price for some reason was forced to be above, then you would get a quantity demanded that is lower than the quantity supplied, like that. And so that is the surplus, and that is the amount of the surplus. So how much more quantity is supplied than is demanded, all right? So sliding along a demand or supply curve is caused by a change in the price of a good, right? If you change the price, you're moving along supply curve or demand curve. Other things change, that's what shifts the supply curve or demand curve, all right? So that leads us to price controls. What are price controls? Price controls are an attempt to set or manipulate prices through government involvement in the market. So it's meant to usually ease perceived burdens on the population. So rent control is an example of a price control. So the idea is that rent is getting too expensive for people to afford, so you just say the price cannot go above a certain price, or it can't grow faster than a certain rate, or something like that. The minimum wage is another sort of price control. The idea is that if wages are too low, people can't afford to live, so we'll force the price to be at a certain level or above. And we're going to talk about those two examples later on, but for now we're just going to talk in general about price controls. So a price ceiling is a legally established maximum price for a good or service. So think of it as like a ceiling in the room. You can't go above that ceiling. If the price rises up too high, you'll stop at that ceiling. And we're going to, in the next screencast, do this graphically, so you'll be able to see what that looks like. And a price floor is like the floor in a room. You cannot go below that floor. The price cannot fall below that price. It is the legally established minimum. Okay. So historically, price controls have not gone so well. In ancient Egypt, farmers revolted when the government tried to set price controls on food. They didn't want to allow food to be more than a certain price. The farmers revolted and the economy collapsed. There was a price ceiling placed on grain in ancient Greece, and so the supply of grain completely disappeared. The government said you can't sell grain for more than a certain amount, and so it was actually an amount that was so low that the farmers couldn't cover their costs, so they just stopped making the grain, and the supply of grain disappeared. Throughout history, price controls have disrupted the normal functioning of the market. They prevent the market from clearing. More importantly, they prevent the market from sending the signals it wants to send. So if prices are rising really rapidly, that means that there is there's more demand than supply in that area, and that sends a signal to make more and send more stuff. We'll talk about price gouging laws later on, but often price controls circumvent those signals that the economy is trying to send to make more stuff or send more stuff, or make less stuff or send less stuff to a certain area. All right. So a few more recent examples of price controls are in 1941, the U.S. Office of Price Administration set price controls during World War II, and that resulted in black markets. A black market is an illegal market that arises when price controls are in place. The best known example is when the price is set at zero, when it is prohibited from selling. So narcotics, prostitution, there are lots of things that are banned. You cannot buy or sell them legally, but we still know that there are markets for those things, and so that's an example of a black market. But that doesn't only happen when there is a prohibition. It can also happen when there is just a price control and people want to get around that price control. So other ways that people circumvent price controls is that they reduce the size or quality of a product. All right, so you can tell me what the maximum price I can sell something for, but if you don't specify the quality or the size of the product, I can then change the product on those margins so that the price better reflects what the market would bear for it. All right, so let's do a little thought experiment with bread. So let's assume that the price of bread is getting very expensive. There's inflation in bread prices really quickly. So the government decides that we're going to set a price ceiling of 50 cents per loaf of bread. So this is about half what a generic loaf of bread costs, the cheapest bread at the grocery store. This is about half of that. So first of all, would there be more or less bread for sale? All right. Well, consumers want to purchase more. So, you know, we've halved the price. So quantity demanded is going to shoot way, way up. All right. So consumers want to purchase more, but producers will manufacture less, right? Because they are less willing to sell the bread at that price. All right. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a shortage, and we might get empty shelves for bread. All right. Will the total size of a loaf change? Well, manufacturers may try to maintain the original profits they were making by reducing the size of each loaf. So you're not going to get these giant loaves of bread anymore if there is a price ceiling of 50 cents. What about the quality of the bread? Well, expensive brands will no longer be profitable to produce. So if you go and stand at the bread aisle in the grocery store, there's a wide array of bread, from the cheapest generic loaf of bread up to fancy multi-grain, organic, made by, you know, handcrafted beer, whatever, not beer, bread, handcrafted bread. So you're not going to get the fancy stuff anymore if the price ceiling is 50 cents, all right? What about the opportunity cost of finding bread? Remember those shortages we talked about at the top? Well, for those shortages now, the market no longer allocates the bread according to price, so your willingness to pay no longer determines whether you get something or not. Now, your willingness to stand in line, so you have to incur a cost in a different way. So while the price of bread is lower, the cost of obtaining it might actually be higher to you, because if your time is very, very valuable, standing in line is very, very costly to you. So it may be that in the end, getting the bread is more expensive overall for you, all right? And what would you buy illegal bread if you could? Well, since bread is hard to find and people still want it, there might be a black market in bread. It's hard to imagine that, but if a price ceiling was placed on it, you might see exactly that, a black market in bread. You see this in some places where there are price controls on cigarettes. People bring in cigarettes from other states where they're cheaper, and you get a black market in cigarettes or a black market in other things. If you've ever, when I was in school, in middle school, there was a thriving black market in candy. Candy was prohibited. You weren't allowed to have it. And so people would bring in literally tote bags full of Airheads and Jolly Ranchers and all sorts of stuff, and then sell it on the black market. So if a black market can arise in candy, I imagine it could also arise in something like bread. All right, so that's it for this one.